We have looked at how combining a row of knit stitches and a row of purl stitches creates a stocking stitch. We are now going to look at what happens when I combine knit and purl stitches on the same row. You can combine them in pretty much any combination you want, so 2 knit, 1 purl, 3 purl, 2 knit. We're going to start by doing 2 knit, 2 purl, just to show you how you move your yarn and also the effect that it creates. The first thing I'm going to do is I am going to knit my first 2 stitches. So I insert my yarn from front to back, wrap my needle, bring it through and slip out my stitch. And I do this twice. The next thing I want to do is I want to purl my next stitch. But if I insert my needle to purl, my yarn is at the wrong side of my needle, which is something that we discussed in the purl video. So that's not going to work. So what you do is you take your yarn and you bring it between your needles. To do this, bring the yarn forward under your right hand needle and bring it right through between the right and left needles. You'll see then that the yarn is positioned at the front of your work. You may see this in patterns in a number of ways. You may see it as bring the yarn to the front of your work, bring your yarn through the needles, bring your yarn between the needles. They are all the same instruction for the same thing. You will see now that your yarn is positioned to knit a purl stitch. So you insert your needle and purl your stitch. Insert, wrap and bring it off. You're now ready again to knit your next stitch, but again your yarn is in the wrong position. So you must now take it back between the needles to the back of the work. And you're in the position to knit, and then you knit your next 2 stitches. Then you bring it back to the front of the work, between the needles, and you purl your next 2 stitches. And you continue bringing your yarn back and forth between the needles as you do the 2 different stitch types. Your yarn is at the back for your knit stitches and at the front for your purl stitches. Once you've finished a row, you can see that for some of your stitches the bumps have gone to the back, your knit stitches, and for your other stitches, your purl stitches, the bumps are at the front. What we have done here is we have knit 2, purl 2. I will include in the booklet for this class details of how you will see that written in patterns. Here on the other side of the work, you can see that again you have the bumps and the flats, and the bumps and the flats that correspond to the other side. So you have bumps on one and a flat piece on the other. And what we want to do in the next row is we're going to repeat the row. But instead of having all of my purl bumps come to the front, I'm going to knit on top of my purl stitches and purl on top of my knit stitches. And this will create a different type of fabric that we will look at the end. So we're now going to knit the first 2 stitches as we did in the previous row. You will see different versions of this, but right now we're knitting and purling. And as you'll see, I now have 2 bump sets on the back of the work, one from the purls and one from the knits. And again you'll see here that I am knitting 2, moving my yarn, purling 2 and moving my yarn, so back and forth between the needles again. And you continue doing that until the end of the row. You can see here that I have now worked 2 rows. For 2 of the stitches, every second stitch you see the bumps have come both to the front, and on the other both sets of bumps have gone to the back. And that is how you will create a rib stitch. Now you can create ribs in any different size. We'll talk more about ribbing in a minute, but this is how you do it. You knit some of the stitches in a row and you purl others. There will be occasions on which you knit a stitch that you knit every time you're doing it, whether it's the back or the front of the work, but we'll look at all of those different types of stitches as well before we finish this class. But right now the importance is to practice knitting and purling on the same row and making sure that your yarn is in the correct position.